Mhm.
and then we'll get going. Okay, for the sake of time, we might as well start. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining Grasshopper's webinar on virtual networking and tips and tricks. My name is Heather Miller. I am the founder of Grasshopper. For those of you who aren't familiar with Grasshopper, Grasshopper is a mobile app for female identifying and non-binary mentees and mentors. Our mission is to increase the number of women and diversity talent in leadership roles. And on the app, you can build a profile, connect with peers and mentors, share knowledge, and learn from role models. In addition to helping our women connect on the platform, we provide a slew of resources for professional development for everyone, regardless of gender. So this webinar is an example. We have other webinars coming up, and we have an upcoming ideathon that you can enter for cash prizes and mentorship from sponsoring companies. We're running this particular webinar because we received some outreach from all of you that given the COVID landscape, our users are having to conduct much more of their lives online, not to mention recruit online, which is different for all of us. And they wanted some tips and tricks. So here we are with those. Without further ado, I'd love to welcome our amazing panelists. So we have Brianne Lovett from Amazon, we have Laura McGee from Diversio, and Valerie King from Ernst & Young Consulting, and our moderator, Jessie Yu, who is our business development intern at Grasshopper. I just want to give the stage over to our panelists to just go a little bit deeper into your backgrounds and your journeys for all of us. Laura, do you want to start maybe?
Yeah, great. Hey everyone, so Laura McGee, I am the founder and CEO of Diversio. My background is I started my career as a corporate lawyer and then made the jump into management consulting and then made the jump into AI and technology. And, you know, kind of spoiler alert, networking was absolutely critical to making those transitions. So I'm really excited to talk to you all today about kind of what that looked like for me.
Great. Brianne, want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining. My name's Brianne Lovett. I'm a director of product management at Amazon. I lead our fulfillment operations technology team, specifically the product management, user experience design, and analytics disciplines. I have also been through other roles in other types of companies similar to Laura. My background's actually in cultural anthropology and linguistics. And I first started my career in marketing, actually working in China, and then recognized it just wasn't analytical and challenging enough for me, kind of for my brain. So moved into a forecasting role and entered tech. And then similar to Laura, actually, the way that I've gotten every job since has been through my personal or professional network, which is something I'm very passionate about nurturing over time and really excited to dive deeper into that later through this webinar. Thanks for having me.
Great, thank you so much. Valerie, you're on.
Hi everyone, I'm Valerie King. I am a recruiter at EY and I specifically recruit at the University of Texas. And I graduated from Texas Tech with a degree in marketing. All through college, I thought I was going to go into sports management, marketing, thought I was going to be this top female sports agent, and didn't work out like that. I ended up interning with Tech Athletics, but I also was a student assistant in the Human Resources Department at Texas Tech, and my strengths aligned with that. And so through networking and things like that, I was able to get an internship and then get a full-time role. I ended up at EY because I was in the sports world. I worked in baseball and got pregnant with my now 3-year-old. And if you know anything about baseball, it is crazy. So if, you know, sometimes there would be 7-day homestands, 14 days working straight, and I realized I could not balance a family with that. And I looked around and nobody had families that were in leadership roles. So I looked on LinkedIn, and I did not think I would find anything on LinkedIn because I'm like, who hires from LinkedIn? But it works. So yes, please add people on LinkedIn and network with them. That is how I got my role at EY, and I've been loving it and love working here ever since.
Nice. We might have to have you on a panelist on one of our upcoming webinars. Again, we're doing women in sports and why it's so difficult to break in. So we'll have to pick your brain on that one too. Jessie, you're up.
Hi guys, so as Heather mentioned, I am the business development intern for Grasshopper, and I am currently a sophomore at UT Austin studying finance. Some fields that I'm really interested in include consulting, tech, and also just like thinking finance, that realm. Obviously, since I am an underclassman, I'm still just trying to explore the field. And working at Grasshopper for the past summer and kind of spring and now fall, it's just been a wonderful experience. The whole female empowerment model that Grasshopper has is just really empowering for women. And yeah, make sure to like download the app and join our idea fund. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Jessie. So welcome everyone. We are going to give you some, hopefully, I was going to say all the tricks that you need for virtual networking, but as each one of these women has described, it is kind of a lifetime of learning. So we'll give you some tips here, and always feel free to reach out to us after this webinar and beyond for more. At Grasshopper, we believe networking is important for a variety of reasons, but one of the most important is something that speaks to the core of our mission, which is personal and professional exploration. So we choose to see networking more as reaching out for learning purposes. If you make networking less transactional and can reach out to someone to learn more about them as a person and learn more about their roles, chances are you'll have a great learning experience, and you'll learn something or meet someone who will help you serve your goals and aspirations. But I do want to turn this to our panelists and find out why networking has been important to all of you. So maybe we'll go in the order that we started and start with Laura.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. It's funny, I didn't appreciate the importance of networking until I started to kind of do it without realizing. So, kind of a bit more specifically, I was at McKinsey at the time. I kind of really wanted to get into the tech practice and the tech space. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know anything. I have no business background. I'm not an engineer. Nothing on my resume suggested I'd be a good fit for that kind of work. And so kind of problem solving, I went, okay, what's the best way to, get in front of the right people who could give me some opportunities? And that's when I thought, okay, well, go and, approach and get to know someone who does the work. And so I think, started doing that, and in that process built a really strong relationship that ended up really benefiting me as I kind of took that vision forward. And what I realized in that moment is, networking really is a shortcut in a lot of ways when you don't have the credentials, when you don't have the experience. If you have someone who says, look, they have the ambition, they have the potential, they have the fundamentals, that really kind of opens up a lot of doors. So I think really for me, especially as an entrepreneur, it's all about the shortcuts. So that's, I think, really why I continue to lean on that skill set.
Yeah, so true. How about Brienne?
Yeah, I can dive in. I have sort of multiple reasons why networking is important to me. First and foremost, as I mentioned in the introduction, it's been the #1 way that I've gotten jobs throughout my career and made pretty significant career shifts as well, from real estate to marketing to finance into tech. And, like I mentioned earlier, they're either as a result of personal relationships that I've nurtured and fostered through the years, or professional relationships. In fact, in my capacity as a market research, ultimately a client hired me And from there, I became a business manager that managed a P&L for Acer, a personal computer and peripherals company. And then I started selling to Amazon, and then Amazon hired me. So number one, it's been also similar to Laura, sort of a shortcut, and frankly, what I believe to be a fast track for me and for my career. The second reason it's super important to me is because now I'm a manager. I manage about a 60-person team. And so networking is my number one way of finding top talent. And so obviously you all need to hear that as you're looking for roles is, people reach out to me at Amazon in very flattering ways to say, hey, would you be willing to, talk to this maybe more junior person in their career, maybe offer a mentorship hand? And like, absolutely. Why? They may have a talent or a skill that I can personally leverage. And so getting to know them and seeing if there's an opportunity on my team actually gives me an upper hand as a manager. So that's the second reason. And then the third reason, which I'll dive into later as we talk about one of the frequently asked questions you guys provided, is it's a way to get things done at work. Amazon being a very large and exponentially growing company on a day-to-day basis with huge technology dependencies on other teams and disciplines and domains requires me to network and get to know other leaders that I can influence over time. And the number one way I do that is just through relationship building, becoming their friend, finding something in common, and again, nurturing that relationship and calling them on them over time. And while that's important and actually not annoying to them, is because they may need me too, and I may add some value to them in their business line as well. So it's very mutually beneficial. So those are kind of my top three reasons why networking is important to me.
That's great. That last one is so interesting. I've never actually heard someone commenting on networking as an efficiency tool, but it's so true. Valerie, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with both of those. And I think for me, networking can open some doors that your resume standing alone can't. Right? If you're maybe about making a career shift and your resume doesn't reflect that career, maybe you know some folks in that industry that can get that's like we mentioned, relationship building is so important. So it's not just networking and chatting here and there and checking in. It's also the relationship building so those people can actually speak to your character and speak to your work ethic. So you want to be able to have a few people in different industries that can actually speak to that. So and enough from a recruiting perspective, when I am going through candidates and I see a resume of someone who I've met several times, I'm even looking at the attendees list and I see people like Christina and I think Lucy and people that I've met before. I remember your names, right? And I'm able to put a face with a name. And if you're able to associate that, I can, if I'm consulting with others and saying, we're trying to figure out who to move forward with, I may be able to speak more to someone who I've networked with and met rather than someone who I'm just seeing their resume and I have no idea who they are.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, I think now we are going to turn to some questions that all of you sent us in advance. So thank you so much for those. And they're all relevant and some specifically relevant to these panelists' backgrounds. So that is great. Jesse, if you don't mind moving to the next slide, this one is for Laura. And the question here is, what is the best way to initiate an online connection?
I love that. I love that question. So there's no right answer, but definitely what I do is way more on the kind of shameless side. So what I've learned is, it's always better to get a warm intro. If you know someone who knows the person you're trying to connect to, if they can introduce you by saying, look, you've got to meet my friend. I think you'll connect on XYZ. That's kind of the A+ answer. That is not always possible. Sometimes you don't want to ask for the relationship capital. Sometimes you just literally don't know someone. So I will say I've had way better luck with the cold email than I ever kind of thought that I would. And so one example, Heather, you were a part of this, is we kind of had this crazy idea, my team and I, back when we were a startup, like 4 months old. We said we want to launch a global hackathon to crowdsource ideas from people around the world to become more inclusive. And we want to set up an expert panel of CEOs from some of the world's biggest leading companies to judge the ideas and vote on their favorites. And we were like, at this point, nobody, no track record, nothing. And we ended up sending cold emails to people like the global head of HR at PepsiCo and the CEO of IKEA Japan and Adam Grant, who co-authored Sheryl Sandberg's latest book. And all three of them, and listen, we sent like 30, but we had, I think, probably 6 people, like C-suite level executives at global companies, respond to this email, which was well crafted. It was short, it was sweet, it was to the point. But I think the learning there was like, okay, if you can like come up with a really cool new idea and phrase it in a concise way, like go for it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. The next one is for Brianne. What difficulties have you encountered with virtual networking, and what are some ways to overcome those?
Yeah, I mean, one is actually highly related to what Laura just talked about. Maybe this is actually the biggest barrier, is just getting in and establishing a connection. And so obviously her ideas are great and super sound. 1, push a cold email, but 2, look for the warm intro and continue to look for opportunities. And often you may not find the exact individual at a given, company or in a given discipline or domain that's like right on the nail with where you think you want to take your career or your next step. But having any conversation is better than no conversation. I mean, another reason that networking is so important, as Heather called out, is you learn something. And so you're on a journey. And so as you, meet with folks along that journey, you're enriching yourself and you're likely enriching them. So one way to overcome that is just continue to look for those, opportunities. And that's particularly hard because it gets into the second challenge, which is often you just don't get a response. And so you feel defeated. And you shouldn't. And it's hard sometimes to, I think, particularly myself, I may take things personally, or it may be a bust in my confidence, but every day you've got to get up and try something different and something new. And frankly, I think it's a game of experimentation, create some hypotheses, track it down and say what worked and what didn't work, and be open to change. And also use your peer network, while they may not be instrumental in that they're at some of these companies or in the roles that you're looking for, they may have great ideas. And so just conversing is super critical. I think another one, and actually we talked about this a little bit in preparation for this with Valerie, is there's a lot of sort of virtual events occurring today that maybe many of you are participating in. I think it's very difficult to get a word in sometimes edgewise. And by the way, I face this as well, just in like meetings at Amazon. We're all online on screen. We're all trying to say something, it's sort of difficult flow of conversation. I think the way to overcome that is by being your authentic self. And that may mean raising your hand or just interrupting, which I think is okay, and bringing a unique point of view that's uniquely yours. And I'll give an example there. Like I mentioned, I'm a linguist, I've lived internationally, and so often just bringing up what I'm very passionate about, which is globalization, internationalization, localization, and hey, are any of your opportunities global, gives you an opening, and usually once you start, you're more willing to continue because you've created momentum, something like sports, right? And then the last thing is really, again, making yourself known and memorable. Like this is, I think, a hard challenge when we're in a format of online exclusively where, again, the flow of conversation is difficult. People are maybe seeing you in the sports team t-shirt you're wearing, or finding those natural ways to connect and expose who you are authentically. So I think you need to look for, or what I do, openings and opportunities for that, and being open to alternative formats. So someone today here might impress you, and you may want to send them a personal note with a component that, again, is very particular to you. Whether you found out that I speak Spanish, so you say, hola, Bri. There's something in every kind of artifact and thing you craft that allows you to leave breadcrumbs for memorability, like Valerie mentioned.
Yeah, that's so great. Thank you. The next one is very specific to Valerie as a recruiter here, and I'm sure you're all excited to hear her answer. So what are some good questions to ask recruiters and industry representatives while networking?
Yeah, this is a good question. I'm actually going to spin it a little bit. So over the course of all these events I've been attending the last couple of weeks, the top two questions that I've been asked are, one, what's the company culture like? And two, what has been your experience at your company? And while those are very, very good questions, about 90% of people ask me those questions, right? And so you want to make sure that you're memorable and your question actually stands out. So I would recommend reformatting that. So maybe you have a question about, how does your company invest in the community? So instead of just saying, yeah, tell me about how your company invests in the community, you can say, you know what, I'm really involved in, while I'm at UT, I'm involved in this organization where we mentor and tutor high school students. I'd really like to continue that upon graduation. Is there anything that your firm or company provides that will help me to do that in the future and invest back into the community? Do you have any initiatives like that at your company? And then what that does is, one, you sell yourself a little bit and you tell a little bit about your background. And then two, you're still asking a question and allowing them to give some more information. So that way they can also go back to what you just said and then kind of build off of that, and you're creating a bigger conversation. So just make sure you can come up with a whole list of questions. There's a ton of good questions that you can ask. Company culture, all that stuff is good. And I think you need to know the answers to that, but you want to just reformat them slightly so that you're selling yourself a little bit and making yourself stand out.
Perfect. Thank you. Before we move on to the next question, I just want to remind everyone, I'm seeing some emails come in for questions to me, and there is a Q&A function on the right side of your screen. So if you have any questions, please enter them here, and we'll be happy to join those at the end of this call. All right, moving on to the next one. This one is for Laura again. Jesse, do you mind moving to the next slide? Thank you. So how have you navigated your company through the power of networking? Actually, this one's for Brian, so I'm going to let Brian answer this one.
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier about like why networking is so important to me is that it's been a way to get things done. And I think that I maybe am unique in some ways at Amazon. I think we're a very goal-driven organization, and delivers results and bias for action are core leadership principles of ours. And there's really, we do have a leadership principle on earn trust, but it's usually sort of in the realm of achieving your end business goal. But one thing I've done and take a lot of time and pride in doing is nurturing these connections I've made throughout my time at Amazon. It's also quite common at Amazon to change roles or organizations. I've actually only done that twice in my 8-year career. But as I've worked on projects or programs or deliverables for where I believe I've likely made a lasting impression on some leader that I engaged with, or they did on me, I make sure as part of sort of planning every week that I have some level of connection and outreach. Obviously not to all of them, but it's usually due to what I believe they can enrich me with, or what I might be able to enrich or offer them with. And obviously this has paid dividends for me, because I'm able to always follow up with a thank you for making the time, and here's something I've learned or gained from this, but also talk about talent in their organizations or my organizations, which then we can foster mentorship relationships towards, and or we can identify key business goals for which may be shared in common or related. So back to the earlier point around, then we can just short circuit and get to efficiencies or scale at a faster rate. And that's done for me also on the recruiting side is tap into, talent that when I have a void or an opening on my team and I'm looking for a particular skill set, I can say, hey, who have I come into contact with in the past at Amazon that possesses like the leadership qualities as well as has achieved maybe a business outcome that is needed again in this type of capacity, and what can I offer them? And so it can be a highly kind of curated and personal experience, which also makes it a more efficient recruiting process, because we're not going to our recruiting partner like Valerie and saying, let's go look at all these resumes, let's go mine LinkedIn. We're getting someone internal that already understands the company culture and leadership principles, already possesses them likely, and is a known entity. So that also then fosters loyalty in the team, which is why, something that's very important to me and obviously helps to retain top talent and develop top talent over time.
Yeah, that's great. And if you don't mind me just kind of backing up a little bit, you mentioned mentorship and being able to create those type of relationships out of this type of exchange. So can you give an example, or can you share a story of how one of these exchanges has blossomed into something where either you were a mentor or you were a mentee?
Sure, absolutely. In fact, first I was a peer with a woman named Ranjan Ahuja, who was my technical program management partner. So I was the product manager. I would define business requirements, business objectives, success metrics, et cetera. And she would work with the technology teams to translate my business requirements into tech requirements and ultimately hold them accountable as a program whip to achieve the given outcome. We had an unbelievable relationship, and sometimes there's those people in your career that you just really jive with, and you've remembered those times very favorably given the rhythm that you've had with that team. And so she's one of those individuals for me in my first role at Amazon and Fulfillment by Amazon Group. And I identify her superpower, and her superpower is getting things done and holding people accountable, but in a very kind and firm way. So I have a woman on my team named Fish who says, look, she's amazing at the product management aspects, but actually converting that to the technology team and holding them accountable is like really tough. Well, Ranjan and I haven't worked together for 4 years, but we continue to have lunches together, happy hours together, follow each other on Instagram, talk about our kids that are growing up in our similar ages. So I reach out to her and say, can you mentor Fish? And she may not have capacity, and she didn't in this particular case, but she was like, well, what is it about me that made you ask me? And so I share with her that, and she says, I know the perfect person. And so as you'll hear in my favorite tip for networking period, whether it's virtual or in person, that's how networks grow, and that's how opportunities become available or visible, and how you grow or how I've grown anyways, at least in my career. And so that's an example of a way I've sort of used it, not for a business goal, which sometimes it is. Like, for example, we're launching bulk fulfillment and we need to offer enterprise customers a different experience on our shopping website, in which case I just go to my friend who manages Detail Page, who I've been friends with forever. This is not that kind of scenario. This is the same fostering of a relationship and a network, but for enrichment of my people or enrichment of her and her people.
That's so helpful. Thank you. Going back, we skipped over Laura's question here. So in your experience with virtual networking thus far, what has been, actually this one's for Valerie again, we seem to be missing a slide. Okay, this is Laura's question here. So what is the best way to make meaningful and lasting connections in an online setting?
I'm going to get a bit slippery. I'm going to answer this, but I actually think my answer goes well beyond online. And yeah. I think generally networking, it's funny, I didn't go about networking this way, but I've realized I have a real strategy in terms of how I build my network. And what I do is I kind of figure out when I meet people, not to be classic consulting, but on my 2x2, who do I really, really like? And also, who do I think would be really additive to my network and my career? And people that I both really like and I think would be really additive, I really aggressively invest in those relationships. And so it's quite selective, but I really go to the wall for those people. And what that means is I try to add value in as many ways as I possibly can, as often as I need to, whenever they need me. And it's a small group, so it's not overwhelming. But that's really kind of, I make my circle and I go to the wall for them. And I find that that has worked out incredibly well for me. Those people, when you need them, they have your back. And what you don't realize is that they're also advocating for you in the background, and it's really authentic because they know that you can show up. And I don't want to kind of skip ahead, but one question in the Q&A that I am so glad, I think it was Elizabeth asked, is, how do you balance kind of going for it without being seen as pushy? And for me, I think like a lot of people would call me aggressive. More people would call me eager. And I'm always very, very, very eager to help the people that are in my circle. And whatever they need, such a loser. I'm such a keener. But people actually love that. So I would say like kind of forget, if people think you're like kind of a nerd or whatever, like who cares? What they'll remember is that you show up and that you deliver. So that's like absolutely been my strategy. And I think I definitely would recommend it.
Thank you. All right, moving on to Valerie. Here we go. So in your experience with virtual networking thus far, and I know you had many experiences over the past couple of days, what has been something that students have done that made them stand out amongst other students in a Zoom room or a virtual kind of chat room where there's lots of people?
Yeah, I know Brianna mentioned it earlier, but sometimes it's hard in Zoom meetings to get a word in, or you're trying to figure out when the perfect moment is for you to speak up, right? And I think I'll take off my glasses for this one. One thing I always like to recommend to kind of stand out is to use an open face. So how I'm, making these facial expressions and using some hand gestures a little bit and raising my eyebrows, that helps the representative focus on the people who seem to be very engaged. So when I'm looking at a room and I see somebody just staring at the screen then I'm like, okay, are they listening to me? Okay, maybe they're not interested in EY. They got in the wrong breakout room. Okay, right? And so that's also an impression that you're making. So you have to be very aware of your facial expressions, especially when you're on Zoom. The other thing is you can build up on other people. So definitely go in, kind of have a list of prepared questions that you'd like to hear and have answered from those representatives. But, you can show that you're a team player. If somebody asks a question, maybe you say, you know what, Sarah, that was a really good question. I kind of want to build off of that. And it kind of shows that you're engaging with everyone else and you're not dominating the conversation. Because I think sometimes there are some people that will be the only ones that ask questions. So you want to make sure that, and then sometimes people just don't say anything. So you feel like you just kind of have to keep asking the questions to keep the conversation going, right? But if you can find ways to bring people in, if I see that as a recruiter, I'm like, oh, wow, this person is really good at teamwork and communication, right? That shows a soft skill in a different way. So, having that open face, engaging with other people, having that list of prepared questions, I think will help you stand out.
That's great. Thank you, Valerie. You have asked for our panelists' favorite tips and tricks for virtual networking. So we are delivering those. And let's start with Valerie here.
Yeah, so as you can kind of see, I think it's important sometimes when I meet students, they're just quickly trying to sell themselves and they want to give their elevator pitch and let you know everything on their resume. But sometimes you don't even have to sell yourself that hard. I think the most important part is people love talking about themselves. So ask them about themselves, right? Do they have kids? Do they have a dog? And they'll want to talk about themselves. And then find things that you have in common with them. And you can kind of build off of that and figure out how you can build a relationship. So sell yourself, but not too hard.
That's great. Brianne, let's hear a little bit more about yours.
Yeah, this is my favorite because it has that like explosive and exponential kind of scale component to it. Maybe I'm highly biased by being in tech and in big tech. But you know, you all have, like I mentioned earlier, a ton of already meaningful connections, whether they're with your teachers or your peers or recruiters for who you've interacted with. You probably already have a trusted kind of board of directors, as I like to call them, a group of mentors or sponsors. When you're creating your objective for your career or your next move, the thing you want to achieve, one, I encourage you to think about it more from an input standpoint than an output standpoint. You may have a particular company or role in mind, but what are the things you're looking to gain and to learn? And when you talk about those with this network that you already have, say based on that, who are 3 people you think I should be talking to? Because it takes a lot of conversations and, like I mentioned, nurturing to get to the one magical moment of, yeah, I have like a perfect role on my team for you, or we're actually looking to do this at our company and it seems you have a ton of passion there. But it's going to take more than one time. So if you ask each person that you come in contact with and are generally impressed, like I would not encourage you to do this with people that you're like, we don't have anything in common, or they've not made a lasting impression on me and I haven't. Because as Laura mentioned, there will be a behind the scenes conversation going on of, hey, I've made this connection or recommended this person reach out to you. And you want that to be, that individual who's doing that to have a favorable memory of your interaction with them. But as you do this, you can imagine you talk to 3 people and ask them to recommend you to 3 people, then you've got 12 people now in your network. So it's very quick. And then obviously, you know, friend them or those that you had a meaningful connection with on LinkedIn, and you have both your virtual network to rely on, as well as now your quote unquote, you know, personal and network, having interacted with these people. So that's my favorite tip. I tell my team that all the time, like when I make these introductions to mentors, is also ask that person who's 3 people I should meet.
I love it. I love it. Thank you for sharing. And Laura, I'm looking at yours and smiling because we have some Canadian spelling here. And I think maybe the Canadians are overwhelming the panel here with Brienne, myself, and you. But can you tell us a little bit more about yours?
Yeah, you know what? I actually already made this point around adding value, so I'm going to go a bit rogue. I think here a different tactic. So this is a bit of a curveball, but what has really worked well for me is I find that people really love like an interesting new idea. And it doesn't have to be a big thing, even a little thing like I want to write this article or start this little, I don't know, banana stand or so, just anything that's kind of a unique spin. And so what I find has really worked for me is like kind of having those bold ideas, you know, connecting with people on that idea, especially if it's like not profit oriented, doesn't really benefit you. It's just something cool that you're passionate about. I find that if you like build connections on something like that, and then you show that person you can kind of deliver against that idea, you start to build a reputation that makes it really easy to get a call back. So just kind of to make that real, I remember when I was in consulting, I did have an idea to write an article on the Toronto Waterloo corridor and growing it as a tech cluster. I reached out to someone I didn't know and I said, hey, I have this idea for this article. Do you want to partner on it? Then we partnered on this little article. I wrote it, we delivered, it went well. And then with that person who was notoriously hard to get a hold of, whenever I needed him, it was always like became a really strong connection. And so that like little tactic of like, you know, if you want to build a new relationship, go to them with something interesting that they kind of want to engage with. So they don't feel like they're doing you a favor. It's just kind of a fun moment in their day. Deliver against it, and then you have a supporter. And that's someone that will kind of naturally go out and make those connections for you.
That's really helpful, really interesting. Thank you. All right, we're gonna move on to some Q&A from all of you. And I'm gonna let Jessie moderate this. So Jessie, you're on.
Awesome, hi guys. So as Heather said, I am moderating the Q&A. And so it looks like the first question that we have is from Tian Yun. The question is, do you think it will be helpful for international students to network with people from a company who won't provide a sponsorship? This question is kind of open to all three of our panelists today. So whoever wants to answer, just jump on.
I can start off. I think it's definitely still helpful for you to network. I do know that it's hard. I have a lot of students come up to me and ask, do we sponsor international students? And especially in this environment, a lot of companies are staying away from that. But you never know where a person is going to end up. So maybe you're networking with that person and they're at the company, but later on down the road, a couple months later, they've left and they've gone somewhere else. And maybe there's a position open for you. And so if you built that relationship and that network, you never know what doors are going to be open. So definitely I would still do that. You may not have to focus as much time. You still want to focus on the companies that are actually hiring international students, but you still also want to build that network.
Awesome, thank you for that. So second and third questions actually all really pertain to like cold emailing and just cold messaging. So the first one really just pertains to LinkedIn and how to create that connection through try to get a referral through LinkedIn through a cold message. And then the second one is really through forming like a solid connection through cold emailing. And I think this person is kind of trying to really pertain that more to like applications and trying to form that connection through that means.
Mm.
I'm happy to jump in. I think it's interesting. This is very much like when I think about doing outbound sales for my company, it's like, okay, how do you like go after someone that you have no connection to and you're just trying to pitch your product? I think two things. Number one, try and make it personable, short, concise. If it can feel personal, great. If you have something in common that you can refer to, maybe you went to the same school, come from the same city, try and add that lens and kind of say, look, I'm interested in X company for Y reason. Short and sweet, but make it feel meaningful. The last thing you want is for them to feel like you copy and pasted the message. But with all that being said, this is going to be a numbers game. So one thing that I had to get comfortable with as a massive people pleaser is like rejection is going to be a big part of this process. So people are mostly going to ignore you. And like, honestly, you have lost nothing. So like, don't be annoying and don't be memorable in the way, like, don't be offensive. But I would keep in mind, and I don't want to make this a gender thing, but I do find that, often women can be a little bit more nervous to do this kind of outreach because we're not often conditioned to take rejection that often. I would say, like, look, at the end of the day, people are not going to remember all of the people that they ignored on LinkedIn. So like, you really have nothing to lose. So do 100 of them. If 5 say yes, honestly, that's a win.
I just want to add something really quickly to that one too, because I get quite a few kind of cold LinkedIn outreach from various individuals, obviously mostly folks I don't know. But I was thinking through this when this question was being asked, when I respond and when I don't respond. And like, I actually think there's a trend there. One, if I don't feel, to Laura's point, like overwhelmed by the amount of information that the person is sharing with me to sell themselves, I'm more apt to want even just like complete reading the note. And two, if they ask me a question that shows they've done some amount of research on me or my organization, then I'm likely going to respond. And third, I've noticed, and maybe it's just stroking my ego, but I'm being honest, if they're asking for advice, because I actually love having, like, again, mentorship type discussions and how did you get here? I'm just curious about your path. That's something I'd love to talk about, and then we may have a connection. So I'm happy to respond to that. But if it's almost too concise and pointed and like, here's my objective, can you help me? It's sometimes a bit off-putting. But if it's somewhat open-ended and like, I'd like to have a dialogue with you, understand you're a busy professional and mom, but like, if you have time, would love it, I'm more apt to respond.
I think one thing that's a bit strategic is like, don't go after the same person that everybody's going after. Like if you go after, I'm making this up, but maybe if you want a job at McKinsey, don't go after like the head of recruiting. but maybe go after someone who's like a little bit more junior, a little bit newer. You're just more likely to get a hit, I would say, if they have a little bit more time for that.
I was actually going to say something similar, Laura. I'm glad you said that, because I get a lot of messages because I'm a recruiter, right? And I do not answer them at all because I get so many. So I would be sitting here all day going through LinkedIn messages, and I don't have time to do that, right? So what I would recommend, like Laura mentioned, go with someone more junior, so maybe like a staff or someone or a senior, because what will happen is sometimes I'll get emails from my client server saying, hey, this person messaged me on LinkedIn, do you mind reaching out? And from there, yes, I will reach out, right? But, and sometimes I will kind of scan through and see if anything looks interesting that I might want to respond to. But for the most part, I don't have time to respond to everyone. So if you reach out to someone a little bit more junior, that may be helpful as well.
Awesome, thank you guys for that. The next question kind of extends off of that. So when is it appropriate to ask a professional if they could put in a good word at their company? And is it ever appropriate to do so?
I think a lot of this is like, a lot of this is in delivery. So what I find is, again, show up for the person, like make sure that you have built a positive reputation in their eyes. If you haven't built that reputation, I wouldn't even bother. Like that's just a bit of an ask and it might be off-putting to them. But if you're in good standing with them, a lot of it's kind of stylistic, like, look, I'm really looking forward to applying to McKinsey or Amazon or what have you. And do you have any advice? Like, is there anyone I should get to know? And then when they say, X person in recruiting, then you say, would love to get to know him or her. And what's the best way? Would you suggest like that I send her an email? And then at that point, typically, if they feel like they want to put in a good word, they'll say, listen, let me send them a note. Or if they don't feel comfortable, then they'll say, yeah, like, maybe do some cold outreach. And so then it's not like, I don't know, and maybe this is Canadian of me and I'm too like, you should be more direct. But for me, I find like typically they'll offer if they want to, if you give them the setup.
All right, and then I guess moving on to the next question. Laura, I know you already kind of touched upon this in your previous answers, so it would really be nice to hear from Rhiannon and Valerie. So what are some ways that a student can add value to a recruiter or a hiring manager?
And I guess I might need a follow-up. So that might be challenging in this format, but is it specifically with regards to looking for a job?
I think the way that they phrased it, yes.
Okay.
I actually am kind of seeing this question, and maybe this will help us answer it as, we were talking, one of Laura's tips was always add value. And so what are some of the ways that, say you're working with a student group, Valerie, I see that I used to see this all the time with recruiting. If I was on campus, maybe they're a president of a club and I need to work with that club to, organize a presentation. How can they add value to me? They're helping me on campus has added value to my work, and therefore I am more than willing to turn around and help them in their recruiting endeavors. So I don't know if you've had an experience like this, Valerie, or even Brian as a hiring manager. Is there something that someone, a recruit along the way has done that has made it easier for you to, think of them as a hiree?
Yeah, I've now that you put it that way, yes, definitely. So we work with a lot of different student organizations at UT, and within those, we have some students that have gone through the recruiting process before, or are former interns, and when they started off in the beginning, before they even got an offer with us, they were super helpful with making sure that we had everything we needed at a specific event, or they were really good at following up and things of that nature. So I always knew that person, and I knew that I could go to them and make sure that if I needed anything, they would 100% be able to provide that for me, right? And so when I was helping to figure out, okay, who are we gonna move forward with and things like that, I was able to go back and reference that and reference those moments of, oh yeah, that person is the president of such and such. And, when we had this event, they were so amazing. Always made sure we had water, which is minimal, but it's memorable, right? So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and to add a little bit more from like the hiring manager angle here, I think there's two things. One that come top of mind anyways when you put the question in that way, Heather. I think the first is just be prepared. Like if a hiring manager or a recruiter is going to take time, they want you to be prepared and be your best. So make sure to have done your research, have your set of questions lined up, and again, index on how to differentiate yourself. So I think that's one. And then the other, Laura kind of already mentioned, like bring an idea. I mean, I'm a product development lead, so it's like I'm always looking for great ideas. And if you're a consumer of Amazon, for which probably most of you are, I hope you are. If you are, thank you. Come with a new idea. What's one thing we can improve about our shopping experience? What's one thing we could improve about our delivery experience? What's a service you wish we offered? Like I'm always looking for great inventions, and that will certainly set you apart as if you come forward with, I was thinking about this, don't preface it with it may be silly, but even if you do think it's silly, just bring it forward. I think it can add value, and again, it can highly differentiate you as a candidate.
Fantastic. And then last question from our Q&A is in regards to follow-up. So what are some tips to maintain a relationship with someone after the initial contact? And then how often should you reach back out?
That's a good one. You know what? I guess I'll kind of jump in there because we do this a lot with clients. And how often do we, we have a prospect, how often do we like stay in touch with them, respecting their time and not kind of overburdening them with something that's not interesting to them, but also kind of keeping the contact warm. I would say again, like I personally do not take a systematic approach. I take more of an opportunistic approach. So, I have again in my small circle of people I want to cultivate, when something comes up that I genuinely think that they would be interested in, maybe something that we've done or something I've come across, I'll send it to them with a personal note. Maybe it's an article, maybe it's something, ideally it's something that's not easily accessible. So it's something that they're kind of like, ooh, like I get, inside access or whatever. I'll send it when it makes sense. I don't recommend kind of, setting a reminder every 3 weeks and checking in and saying, or sending articles that aren't really on point just to stay top of their inbox. I think, after a few of those, it gets awkward because they're like, oh, stop, get out of here a little bit. So I would say, try and make it specific and personal if you can.
One other thing I'll add here, because like all of us, I'm busy. And so sometimes it's actually, I've done some amount of like research on a candidate's behalf, potentially, and this was a recent example. I talked to a woman who's in information security, program management. And so I have no opportunities on my team in that way, but I was impressed by her responsiveness, her resume, our discussion. And so she followed up with me and, asked, hey, like, how are things going? And, I basically got a dead end at Amazon in terms of pursuing things on her behalf. I went to 2 information security teams and they were like, well, we're hiring engineers right now. We're not hiring any program managers. And I don't know, because there wasn't an opportunity and I just got busy, I didn't respond to her maybe as timely as I should have. She reached back out and actually said, I did some things on my own, and I just want to share with you what I discovered at Amazon, which moved the ball along and showed me she's not entirely dependent on me. And by the way, these are the kinds of people we want to hire at Amazon, highly autonomous and self-sufficient. And number 2, she called out something that I said just in passing in our conversation, that was helpful to her or changed her or her outlook on things. And so she added those two elements. Here's what I've done. And by the way, here's something you said that's really stuck with me. And so now she, like, I know her name, you know, I know her first and her last name. And if any role comes up in information security and program management, I'm going to reach out to her. Versus, I think, had she not done that type of personal follow-up, which impressed me. So that's just one example and something to consider here.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that a little bit, I often recommend, Laura touched on this a little bit, and so did Brianne, but just, you know, reaching out when that person comes to mind. You are, you know, say you're, like Laura said, reading an article, and all of a sudden, say my mentor, Melinda, pops into my mind, and I'm like, oh, you know, this made me think of you. And just having that consistent, those consistent check-ins and just making sure that you are top of mind for that person helps, one, to cultivate the relationship. They get to know you, they get to know what you're interested in outside of the specific job. And sometimes that helps them expand their thinking of you. So if there are other roles that are not necessarily specifically specific to the role that you had connected with someone on, you know, they might be able to see that, you know, you're a Renaissance woman or men, that you have many talents and that they can be used in different areas. So sometimes just having that kind of consistent check-in that's thoughtful and useful, as Laura said, adds value is really helpful to keep someone top of mind. Okay, I'm looking at the clock here and we are at just about time. So I just want to thank Valerie, Brianne, Laura, Jesse, thank you so much for your thoughts, your wisdom, your moderation. I want to thank all of you Grasshoppers for joining and letting us get to know you and asking all of these fantastic questions. We look forward to seeing you on the next webinar, but in the meantime, please connect with us on social at Grasshopper on all the social media platforms. We have an ideathon similar to Laura's ideathon that she was speaking to that is closing next Friday, the 18th. So just visit our site. You can download the app. If you have an Android, just email us. We'll give you a web app access, and we'll be sending you a follow-up with our panelists' tactical tips, tricks, and this recording. So see you all soon, and thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.